Hello, welcome to an episode of the Let People Prosper series. My name is Dr. Vance, Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today we're recording on July 24th, 2023, and I'm delighted to have on another happy warrior, someone who's really on the front lines in Arkansas, but also in making good policy across the nation, and it's none other than Nic Horton. Nic, welcome to the Let People Prosper show.
Hey, Vance, thanks for having me. It's really great to be here.
Well, I'm pleased to have you on. We're going to have a good discussion today, talking about healthcare and education, school choice, and a number of other areas that I know a lot of the audience is interested in. So we're gonna get right to it. But before we do that, let me go ahead and read some of your bio here, and then we'll jump into it. So Nic Horton is the founder and CEO of Opportunity Arkansas, a lifelong, how do you say it? Arkansan. There we go, Arkansan.
Arkansan.
Nic has done political and policy work in roughly half the country, ranging from Maine to Montana. His original research and analysis have been highlighted in the Wall Street Journal, Fox News, and other national outlets. Nic has also appeared on numerous talk radio shows across the country. His early career as a journalist and Medicaid policy enthusiast led him to the Foundation for Government Accountability, FGA. Spurred by his passion for Arkansas and solving his home state's generational problems, Nic took a giant leap of faith in 2022 to pursue his decades-old dream of running his own policy organization. In August of 2022, Opportunity Arkansas was officially incorporated with the state of Arkansas. OA, as it's known as, right, works to solve generational problems like poverty, dependency, crime, and failing schools by simplifying government. When he's not writing a policy piece or chasing his kids, I know all about that. Nic enjoys the gardening, any good home improvement project, and storytelling. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Public Administration and a Master of Business Administration, both from Harding University. That's a great background there, Nic, and I know we're going to have a lot to talk about today. And so, as I do with every guest, let's start off here. Why do you do what you do each and every day?
Great question. It's a big question. I could probably talk about that for the entire show if I wanted to. But at the end of the day, ultimately, it's about my kids. It's about creating a better Arkansas and a better opportunity for them. You know, if you'd asked me this question 10 years ago, I probably would have had a different answer. You know, I was trying to make my way in the world and trying to get my career started and trying to, pay off my student debt and all sorts of things that I was focused on then. But now as a dad of a 6 and a now 3-year-old who just turned 3, my daughter, a few weeks ago, I'm really focused on what kind of Arkansas, what kind of future we're going to leave for them. And I know that's kind of cliche. That's like the political, answer that everyone gives out on the stump, but it's really true. And you hit a point, I have a birthday coming up in a few days here. I'm going to get a little bit older.
Yeah.
And you hit a point in your life where I think many of us have now gotten where we start to think more seriously about what kind of world and state and country we're going to leave behind for our kids. And that was something that had been on my heart for a while. And a couple years ago, I went through some personal tragedy, lost my dad. And again, just a moment of clarity where I thought, you're reminded up close, for me, for the first time, of the brevity of life and how short, our time really is on this earth. And we have a very small window of time to affect the future that our kids are going to inherit. And when I had a chance going through that process, I had a chance to kind of step back and take stock of where I'd been and what I had accomplished so far in my life, and what were the problems that my parents handed down to me 30 years ago. And I started looking back and thinking, okay, 30 years ago in the early 90s, I'm a kid growing up in Arkansas in poverty, and my parents were talking about poverty and dependency and record crime and a broken foster care system and broken families all around us, and state government that was too big and took too much out of our paychecks. And here I am now 30 years later with my kids about the same age that I was, and I'm the age my parents were at the time. And what do we have? We have 1 in 3 people on Medicaid in Arkansas, 1 in 3 people on Medicaid. We've got about 1 in 10 on food stamps. We've got a completely broken foster care system that has led numerous times to kids sleeping in DHS office buildings because we don't have enough foster families to take care of the neediest among us. We've got a state government that takes $2.5 billion a year out of our paychecks through a work punishing income tax, I call it. And we've got the same generational problems that we had 30 years ago. And my parents were in poverty. My dad was a blue collar worker, worked 2 jobs most of my life to put us through school and to put food on the table. he didn't have a chance to solve these generational problems. But because of my experience and my education and my upbringing and some of the relationships that I've been very fortunate to have, I've got a chance to solve, and to be a part of solving some of these problems. And so that's why I started Opportunity Arkansas.
Yeah, no, I love it, Nick. And the background and everything else. I mean, there are these challenges that we face that set us up for the stages that I believe God has a calling in our lives in order to find what those are. And sometimes they come out in the strangest of circumstances that maybe we otherwise wouldn't have had, but that's the perfect timing and God's timing, for us. And, I know that you shared with me not too long ago that, your dad had passed away, and that really gave you all these new ideas of where to go. And I think your dad would be very proud of you right now of all the things that you are doing. And as I share with you, like my dad passed away in 2011, my mom passed away last year. And it definitely does give you another way to think about the world, how the brevity, like you said, how short we are here, but at the same time, like how much of an impact we can have. Just think about like your dad, the impact he had on you, and my dad and my mom had it on me. And now we can kind of share that not only with our kids and hopefully grandkids one day and everything, but others that are out there, whether it be in Arkansas or Texas where I'm based, or Louisiana where I do some work. And public policy, it's not for everybody because there are a lot of ups and downs. You're not going to get everything you want overnight. Or many times you will be working at this for years and years, sometimes decades, right, before you really see what you have been working on come to fruition, all the great work that you've been doing over time. But it is a process, and it is one that we're in it for the longer game, right, of how to do this. And you can't get down. And I love that about you too, where you do have this kind of happy warrior, optimistic attitude, because if we didn't, we would just sit around and, be sad all the time. And we know we can't do that. And so at Opportunity Arkansas, I'm really excited about the things y'all are already doing. And what are some of the key areas that you're working on, now that you see are going to be the main, issues moving forward?
Yeah, big question. We've got, when I decided to start Opportunity Arkansas just over a year ago, I mean, I've been telling people this time a year ago, we didn't even have a name. I mean, we'd started to put a board of directors together.
Wow.
And started to work on our paperwork, but we didn't even really know for sure what our name was going to be, what our brand was going to be, we didn't have a mission statement. And so we've come a long way in a year, which has been tremendously exciting. And I appreciate, your comments about kind of providence and God's role in that, because I definitely, I've tried not to be shy about sharing that with our supporters and folks that are following our work. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind, we would not be here were it not for some providential things that have happened, but it's been really exciting. So when I decided to start the organization, I made a commitment to myself and to our supporters and to my board that we weren't going to just nibble around the edges. We got, again, we talked about generational problems. Anyone out there that's listening that's not from Arkansas can probably name them, because there are these stigmas and these stereotypes about Arkansas, about poverty, about dependency, about record violent crime that we've now seen in the last couple of decades. The stereotypes are clear. And my frustration has been that we've just nibbled around the edges, and we've been scared at times to take on the root causes of those problems. Not that different maybe than in Texas or Louisiana or some of these other states. But again, this is my state. This is my home. This is where I grew up. I hope, God willing, this is where my kids stay and grow up and raise their kids and have a good life and good opportunity. But that's not going to be the case unless something changes, unless we get to the root cause of these problems. And so I can't tell you the number of friends and people that I know who grew up in Arkansas, graduated school, got out of school, started looking at where they were going to settle down, where they were going to make a better living. I mean, one of my best friends from college lived here most of his life, and he got out of school, and the opportunity wasn't here. It was in Tennessee. It was in Memphis. It was in Nashville. It was in Austin and Dallas. And, we're surrounded by states that are frankly kicking our tails economically when it comes to competing for jobs and competing for good people and good workers. And so we made this commitment. We're not going to nibble around the edges. I'm not going to start a brand new organization and spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week fundraising, writing policy papers, doing media appearances, doing all this work to just, pass a small licensing reform bill and go home. I think licensing reform is very important, and we're working on that. but we're not just working on these sort of cookie cutter around the edges issues that other states are working on. So we're going big. We got a super big win already this year, which, we can't take all the credit for it, but certainly we played a very big role in getting universal education freedom passed in the state of Arkansas. I think when you talk about poverty, dependency, crime, I mean, there's a foundational problem there, right? And a lot of times it's education. And we've been trying to do the same thing for the last 150 years in Arkansas in our education system and expecting a different result. I believe Einstein said that was the definition of insanity. And so we've been laying some groundwork for the last several years, doing some small pilot choice programs and kind of proof of concept programs. And thank God we had a governor that came in and said, we're going to reject the status quo. We're not going to do the same thing over and over and over again and expect different outcomes. We've got 2 out of 3 kids in Arkansas that can't read. Something's broken and we're going to fix it. And so now that we've gotten that taken care of, so to speak, although that work is still ongoing, getting it implemented and getting folks aware, we're really focused on getting rid of the state income tax. That's our North Star at Opportunity Arkansas. Because again, when you talk about people, growing up in Arkansas and wanting to go find an opportunity, the personal income tax and the corporate income tax are a huge part of that. We're taking 5% roughly out of folks' paychecks every 2 weeks. We're punishing them for earning money. We're punishing them for climbing the economic ladder. We've made some progress. We've started chipping away at those personal income tax rates, but we're surrounded by 2 states, one that you're in right now and one to the east in Tennessee, and other states around us, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri. They're all taking chunks and bites out of their state income taxes. And it's a race. It's a race right now to get to zero, to compete for good paying jobs and good workers. And we're deadly focused on that.
No, that's great. It's great. And you brought up so many good points there on when you look at these states like Arkansas, there's so much that goes into each state. You've got their culture, you've got the different economic factors and industries that are going to kind of lead the way for job creation and everything else. But I think what you're hitting on there, which is so important about the school choice, which I'm a huge fan of universal school choice. I'm hopeful that happens in every state that will use Arkansas, the Arizona, the other states that have done it. I guess there are about 7 states that have done it here recently, to use that as a model moving forward with, universal education savings accounts where you could take those dollars and go use it for different services that are out there. And I want to dig into that in just a little bit more. But one of the other things you mentioned that was really hit home for me was the competition. There's this competition that's going on maybe more than ever before, or at least when they were early starters and how much was going on. But we've seen a lot of this happen when like more than 40 states have started to cut taxes. More states are going to a flat income tax, to where we're going to have 14 flat income tax states soon, 7, 8 if you include Washington, although they had a dividend tax, but 7 or 8 states with no personal income tax at all. You're talking about almost half of those states are either flat or going to zero or something like that. And that's huge, because that's going to leave a lot of the other states behind. And we've seen this in other states. One of the measures, Nick, that I like to look at is the Economic Freedom of North America Index that's put out by the Fraser Institute. And I've done some work with them over the years, and I think they have a great report that comes out, and they'll have another one in a couple months. But on this one, I was just looking at it this is all using 2020 data. Arkansas, what was it, ranked the 27th, I believe. Yes. Yeah, 27th. And so it's the bottom half of the states. And that's using government spending as a measure, from different measure of government spending, taxation, and then labor market regulation, when you look at it that way. But if you don't have competition and you don't have those bold reforms, you're likely to move further down the list to the California and New York, which are at the bottom, right? Where people are leaving and fleeing these states, compared to places like, Texas. So Florida's number 1, New Hampshire's number 2, South Dakota's number 3, Texas is number 4, Tennessee's number 5. And 4 out of 5 of those states have no all of them don't have a personal income tax, and so there's something about that. And when I was looking at some of the other data for Arkansas, the labor force participation rate right around 58%. But if you go back to just 2011, it was at 60%, just a decade ago, 60%. And so while the unemployment rate in Arkansas and in many other states, by the way, way, looks good. Like it's 2.6%. I mean, that should be full employment. You should, there should be no problems, Nick, of what's going on. But we know that as people drop out of the labor force for a variety of reasons, some going on safety nets, some filing for disability, there was a lot of changes that happened during COVID and the shutdowns and everything else that I think is going to have longer term problems. But if you don't get your taxation right and you don't get your education right and government spending right, that to me is really the kind of the key recipe for everything else for people to have flourishing, to let people prosper. But I wonder is that how you see it, as kind of a recipe, or what else have you been seeing in Arkansas in your work?
Yeah, I think you're definitely on the right track. I think there's another big piece of it, which you kind of started to touch on there, which is dependency. And we've had that problem in Arkansas, again, for generations, but we also made it significantly worse in the last decade or so because we were the first Southern state to expand Medicaid through Obamacare. And a lot of the states we've been talking about here that are doing really well economically, Tennessee, Texas, even Mississippi, didn't expand Medicaid through Obamacare. And for folks that don't know, this isn't Medicaid for your grandmother or Medicaid for folks in nursing homes. Those are folks that already qualify, individuals with disabilities, low-income kids, pregnant women. Those are folks that already qualified for Medicaid, that should get help from the safety net, bottom line. But what we did when we expanded Medicaid through Obamacare was we created this whole new category, this whole new class of working age, able-bodied people who, the vast majority of whom don't even have kids. I mean, they're childless, able-bodied adults. And projections at the time were, we'll probably add about 200,000 people. Expansion enrollment got up over 350,000 people at one point during the height of COVID. You combine that with some of the nonsense that was coming out of DC, where states were bribed effectively with this enhanced Medicaid money if they agreed to not remove anyone from the Medicaid program during the public health emergency. We got to the point where we had 1.1 million people out of a state of 3 million. We had 1.1 million people on Medicaid. Wow. And so again, kudos to the governor and the administration that have come in and said, we got to clean this up. And we haven't been doing eligibility reviews in Medicaid for more than 3 years. And we've got to get back to basics and make sure that people that truly need help from the safety net can get it. And it's not just this, free for all, welfare for all, no time limit, no work requirement, no requirements at all for able-bodied adults. And so we've started to see those numbers go down in the last few months. We started doing the Medicaid renewals in April. And so we've seen dependency starting to trail off, which I think is a really good thing. A lot of those folks are from this able-bodied working age adult population, but that's got to have, look, it's not a surprise, right? CBO said when Obamacare passed, Medicaid expansion was going to reduce the labor market and it was going to reduce earnings and work. And so it's not a surprise that that's happening. And, the question now is just, what do we do about it? Because now we've got this new, population that's now taking up a third of our Medicaid program in Arkansas for a population that was never supposed to be on the program at all. What do we do about it going forward? So I think that's going to be something else. And it ties into state income tax. It ties into all these other things we're talking about, because that's the biggest item in our budget by far is Medicaid. So it's quite a web that we've woven here, and we're trying to figure our way out of it.
Yeah, no, definitely, Nick. And you're right. I was looking, I guess the Arkansas's poverty rate right now is like 16.3%, according to the census. And so you think about that, and you think about the criteria that got them to that situation. One of my favorite economists, I don't know if you've heard of him, is Douglas North. Talks a lot about institutions and the importance of institutions, and these institutional changes that happen over time are really what drives prosperity, but also drive more poverty. And what we've seen a lot of the last couple of years are these large institutional changes, many at the federal level, from the shutdowns and, basically trying to care for people as they don't have a job. Many people lost their job. 22 million Americans lost their job just over, March and April of 2020 when the shutdowns happened. That's a large number of people across the country. And so there was an idea of, let's do something. And I think oftentimes you think about, well, maybe we should have done nothing, or maybe done something differently, like a more targeted approach. Because if not, you change a lot of the incentives. That's where these institutions come in, where now the incentive is for people to stay home and not go to work. They got plus ups or an increased amount for unemployment benefits from the federal government. They got these checks that were being sent out left and right. I mean, savings, Nick, soared to 33%, one of the highest on record. Now it's back down to about 3%. But some people are still living on some of that savings or the Medicaid that they've been on for 3 years. Why would they go back to work? I mean, it's a pretty good gig if you don't have to go to work or anything else. Just stay home, and so that can make the situation worse. Where we started seeing labor shortages and everything else, and now the question is, do they start coming back now that some of those enhanced or the expanded sort of safety net programs start to go away, dry up? Do they go back to work? I hope they do, because if not, they're going to be in a world of hurt, and it could be a tougher situation for the state, because now what you'll have is a lot of people who are going to have gaps on their resume 2 to 3 years. And the economic research on this shows that after you have about 3 months, you already start losing productivity. Now we're talking about 10 times that, Nick. And you add that in with the shutdowns of schools and the setback that has on learning loss. We've got some major challenges that I hope that school choice and tax reform and spending restraint, that will help to unleash a lot of these prosperity and productivity for the future. But it's going to be an uphill climb for a while.
Well, to your point about incentives, I mean, and all of this that you mentioned was done in the name of compassion and care, right? And that's how it's always framed. But when you talk about Medicaid expansion in particular through Obamacare, I call it Obamacare expansion. There's one thing you have to do to maintain your eligibility for Medicaid expansion: stay poor. That's it. That's the only thing you have to do. If you're within the age brackets and you qualify and you get enrolled, as long as you stay poor, you can stay on the program forever. No work requirement, no cost sharing, no time limit. I mean, and these are major outliers. I've done a fair amount of work on food stamps and TANF, cash welfare, some on disability. All of those programs, maybe with the exception of disability, have time limits, have work requirements, have some guardrails in place for people that are able-bodied. And I always, the left's always quick to say, to kind of blend those two and say, we're talking about people in nursing homes and people with disabilities. That's not who we're talking about. We're talking about people like you and me who quit their jobs or maybe got forced out of their jobs, even, let's say in the example of COVID in the pandemic, and got sucked into the Medicaid program. And now they're there, and all they have to do is stay poor to stay on the program. And that's not helping them. That's not, to your point, the longer they're out of the labor force, the more difficult it's going to be for them to get back in. The more skills they're going to lose, the more networks and connections that they're going to lose to get back into the labor force. And you put people on this spiral, and then you're burdening the taxpayers at the same time for people who shouldn't be on Medicaid. It's a disaster, and for states out there that are listening that haven't expanded Medicaid, good for you. We're still kind of dealing with the effects of it here in Arkansas. And I think to your point about labor force participation, it's a big reason why we're not seeing that climb.
Well, I hope you start seeing it soon. And it sounds like you're setting up a good path with the new governor coming in, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and new executive, and just the bills that are being passed and the work that you're doing. It seems like kind of this great recipe for success, for more prosperity that's coming together, because there's a lot of pushback of school choice, right? Like in Texas, they haven't even passed it yet. There's probably going to be a special session later this year, but you get all this the rural pushback from it, because like, oh, you're going to take away our Friday Night Lights football and take away our money. And I'm always like, well, why? Why would that happen? Is that because parents choose somewhere else? Well, maybe you need to look internally first before you start, blaming parents for doing that in the process. But how did you see this turn around? Because we're in the South. You probably face some of the similar sort of arguments from rural areas. How are you able to get that, done there?
Well, it's really interesting, the whole rural piece of this, because one, to your point, it's sort of an admission on their part that like kids and parents would leave if they could. And so therefore, we don't need to change anything, because if you change anything and you let people have a choice, they're going to leave. And then they're going to leave, and our school's going to shut down. And at the same time, they're over here on this side saying, well, but our schools are really great and everything's fine and nothing needs to change. Don't mess with our schools. But then they also, kind of perpetuate this narrative that like, if you let people have a choice, they will leave, which I think is really interesting and pretty thin, I think, to be generous. But the other side of it, and I'm sure you guys have this reality in Texas as well. I would have to dig into the numbers, but we hear from, you hear from the rural schools, you hear from the rural legislators. They're all concerned. They're all kind of saying the same thing. It is interesting how these narratives seem to travel from state to state to state, almost like as if it's intentional or coordinated somehow. Reality in Arkansas, in a lot of these rural districts, unfortunately, frankly, but the reality is there aren't a lot of other educational options for some of those kids that are in these rural areas. And so the idea that the suggestion is, well, if you give people a choice, they're all going to leave. But reality is now, under the choice program that we have, that we're now implementing in a lot of these rural areas, the local public school is really the only option for a lot of these kids. And so, I'm hopeful that over time that will be less and less the case, and that more private schools and charter schools and micro schools and all sorts of options will pop up for these kids. But the idea that if you pass school choice and a switch is going to flip and all of a sudden kids are just going to flee, I don't think is accurate, really, even if for no other reason than just from a supply standpoint. And, it doesn't bear itself out when you look at Florida and other states that have done this. There hasn't been this mass exodus out of rural schools. So the argument just doesn't quite make sense to me, beyond the fact that they're kind of playing both sides of it. I just don't think it holds up.
No, I think that's right. And that's what we see in so many other markets where there is competition instead of this monopoly situation for schools, basically government run schools. And then you have the other side of it, a monopsony situation. So you have one supplier, mainly with being the monopoly, that creates problems at a higher cost and everything else, and lower quality because there's not the competition. But even for the teachers, there's a monopsony situation where you have one buyer. There's really one consumer of the teachers within the area. Like in Texas, I think 91% of teachers are employed by the public schools, whereas 93% of students go to public schools. So that's where you kind of get basically monopoly and monopsony situation. And what's interesting about that, and I've done research on this, is that when you start to open them up to competition and bring about new opportunities, it not only helps the students to get better education outcomes, which is really what this should all be about. It shouldn't be about money and sports and athletics. It should be about academic outcomes and how people are doing over time, but it also helps out teachers. Teachers then have more negotiating power to go out and negotiate a higher salary compared to them just being forced essentially to work at a public school at rates that are being set by politicians and not by the marketplace. And so we hear that a lot in Texas and other places, like, oh, well, teachers are going to get hurt too. And it's like, well, no, we need to put more. I would like for teachers to get paid more, to be honest with you, Nick. I mean, when you think about how much money is going into each classroom, let's say about $15,000 per kid times 20, you're at $300,000. And then a teacher's only getting paid $60,000 out of the $300,000. That's a small fraction. That the number one thing that's helping kids being able to get better educated is, besides the parents and the family, it would be the teacher. And yet we're not setting our priority for those teachers to get paid better. And so I wonder, was that something else that was being discussed there?
Yeah, that was actually part of our bill. So the LEARNS Act that the governor put forward, that the legislature passed, took our starting teacher pay in Arkansas from $36,000 a year to $50,000 a year, which, if you adjust for cost of living, from what I've been told, that puts us pretty much at the top now, definitely in the top 5 in the country for starting teacher pay. I tend to agree with you. I mean, I think if you want to recruit good teachers and retain good teachers, you got to pay them well. You got to take care of them and make sure that they're incentivized to do a good job and they're incentivized to stick around. Certainly I think most people don't get into teaching for the money, and not that you would necessarily want that to be the case, but teachers certainly put up with a lot, and they're spending a lot of time in the day with our kids and the kids of Arkansas. And we need to make sure that we have high quality people in there. To your point about competition too, I think it's so interesting. I mean, think of another sector, another area of the American life where there's no competition. There's very few. And, I think about it like a grocery store. Like, if we only had one grocery store in my hometown, you probably wouldn't want to shop there. Like, it'd be dirty. The food, the deli meat would be stale and out of date. There'd be all sorts of problems with that grocery store. And, I've been to some small towns in Arkansas where they only have one, and that's pretty much the case. But when it comes to our schools, for some reason, we think, some people think less is more, and we just need one, and we just need to use the power of the state, the power of government to force kids to go there based on where they live and the zip code that they're in. And that we should just all pretend like that's normal and we're going to get good outcomes from that. And it doesn't work that way in any other area of our lives or in the world. Like there's nowhere else in the world where you say you have one option, this is it, get used to it, and it gets better. And frankly, to the point about rural schools, I don't know what Texas does in this area, but the state of Arkansas actually does a pretty good job through our state Department of Education rating and grading schools. And so you can go into the state database and look and see this school's an A, this school's a B, this school's a C, all the way down to F. A lot of these rural schools are D and F schools, and they're getting, to your point, they're getting plenty of money. A lot of it's not going to the teachers. It's going to football stadiums or football coaches or administrators. We've seen a huge rise in the number of administrative positions in our schools. Unclear to me what value the taxpayers or the parents and students are getting from having 12, vice principals. But that's something that we're seeing an increase of. And again, without competition, just pouring more and more money at the problem and expecting a different outcome, it's just not how it works. And it's not going to work.
No, great point there. And one of my favorite economists, Milton Friedman, he always says, don't judge a policy by its intentions, but by its results. And too often, I think these are well-intended policies that folks have put together over years, but now we need to reassess and think about what are the results. It's one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of like independent performance audits, for there to be audits of the safety net programs, for there to be audits of the schools, of how they're using their money and things of that nature. And not just the state auditor, which could be a good one in many cases, but maybe even independent efficiency audit. And they did one of those in Texas on the TANF program, temporary assistance for needy families, and they found a lot of weaknesses. And the agencies actually came in and started to change some of how they are performing. And so we'll see what that was here recently. That was just last year. So we'll see what the effects of that will be. But I think we need more of that. We need more of the private sector. Well, we need to privatize more of government and shrink the size and scope of government in so many ways. But if we can get the private sector also involved, I think we'll have a better outcome over time, which is so important about school choice. One thing I did want to mention though, Nick, is that as an economist, I'm looking at competition and capitalism. I believe strongly that free market capitalism is the best path to let people prosper that we know, given the secular world and everything we're in. Ultimately it's God and through Jesus Christ, right? But though that's ultimate prosperity. But here with the world that we're living in, capitalism provides a situation that allows us to meet each other's needs without us even really knowing each other very well, of having these market exchanges come in and having prices to direct resources that are not set by a top-down approach because of the knowledge problem of Hayek and others, but really allowing for prices to work and allocate resources throughout the economy also helps us to live a more moral life, I would argue, and things of that nature, because we have to have trust. We've got to be able to come together. And the two biggest areas of our economy that we talked about today, education and healthcare, you have very little market competition because government controls so much of it that it creates less trust. We don't trust like our healthcare system anymore from Fauci and all the things that have happened the last couple of years. You don't trust the education system of what they're teaching our kids in the classroom. And a lot of it's because we don't have competition, especially lower income people, Nick. The upper income people will be able to afford these things and they'll be able to move to different states. We've seen a lot of them move to Texas and other states. But until we start getting more competition and really reducing government and getting that tax reform like you're talking about and doing, I think it's going to be an uphill battle for a while. But I'm optimistic though, Nick, because of people like you that are doing that. So as we're closing up here, what would you really like to say? Anything else that we haven't covered or anything else? Just kind of flow with it.
Yeah, I would say to anybody, you mentioned these rich people that are moving to Texas. We need some of them in Arkansas. So
right.
Come to Arkansas. I really believe, Vance. I appreciate you maybe gave me a little bit too much credit about being a happy warrior, but I try to be. It's easy some days to get kind of negative and discouraged. But I just have to say, in all seriousness, to folks listening out there, if you haven't been to Arkansas, come to Arkansas. I'll buy you a cup of coffee. I'll show you around. There's nowhere more beautiful. I met a guy, I love telling this story. I met a guy recently at church, and he's got like a PhD from Purdue, and he moved to Arkansas and he started a construction company, and he's younger than me. He's just a young guy. And I was getting to know him, hearing his story one day, and I just said, why the heck did you, I love Arkansas. I grew up here. I know how great it is. Why the heck did you move here? And why did you stay and start a company? And he said two things. He said the pace and the people. The pace and the people. No one's in too big of a hurry to stop and hold the door and ask you, how's your mama and them?
Yeah.
And can you come to church on Sunday and come over for dinner afterwards? And the people, I mean, there's nowhere like it. And I know Texas is great. Tennessee, I was born there. I have an affinity for Tennessee, Kentucky. I'm a Kentucky fan. That's where my family's from. But there's nowhere like Arkansas. And I really think there's a lot of reason for optimism. The industries we have here, I mean, there's a few big corporations from Arkansas you guys might have heard of.
Yeah.
There's a growing and booming timber industry. The tech industry is really kind of starting to take off. And there's just nowhere better to live and work and raise a family. And we're trying to make it even better by solving some of these policy problems. But I think we're going to get there. And there's no reason why in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years that Arkansas shouldn't be the next Tennessee or Texas. There's no reason why, Northwest Arkansas and Central Arkansas, Northeast Arkansas couldn't be the next Nashville or the next Dallas Fort Worth. It's a great area, great people, beautiful cities, beautiful people, the best people, believe me. But it's a great place. And so I would encourage people to come visit and believe the hype, because Arkansas is here to stay.
Yeah. Oh man, I love it. I believe it. And if they have more people like you, then they definitely have some of the best people around. So keep that going. And I definitely want to take you up on that coffee sometime soon as well.
Come on. Coffee, catfish. If you like catfish, there's no better catfish on earth than in Arkansas. There's some good barbecue too, but catfish, I think we're like the number 1 or 2 exporter of catfish in the world.
Nice.
If you like duck hunting, people come from all over the world, literally, to duck hunt in Arkansas. And Arkansas is the only place I think, other than like Africa and the deep African continents, where you can dig for diamonds. You can find diamonds. The only place in North America and in this hemisphere, I believe, that you can find diamonds. So come over, we'll have a cup of coffee, catfish, we'll go dig for diamonds.
So there's plenty of diamonds in the rough in Arkansas, right? That need to open up, and it's going to be a great place. Well, I appreciate what you're doing there, Nic, and with Opportunity Arkansas, everybody, hopefully we'll go check that out to the website, and it's opportunityarkansas.org. You can check all that information out. I'll put in the show notes page as well, where you can find at vanceginn.com or vanceginn.substack.com, my newsletter, where you can get it right in your inbox, each one of these episodes. So with that, Nic, thank you so much for being on the Let People Prosper show. God bless you and your family, and continue to do the great work that you're doing.
Thanks, man. You too.
And
appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. And for the audience, until next time, let people prosper.